Hello, and welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting over episode 4 of Mahou Shoujo Madoka Magica. If you would like to watch along, then start watching now. So it seems like the boy Sayaka's in love with, Kyosuke, isn't in his room like he was before. At this point, it's not clear precisely what's going on, if his condition's worsening or anything. So now we're getting a nice little bit of background here. Apparently he was in some sort of accident that prevented him from walking, but even beyond that, he'll be unable to play the violin even if he does learn how to walk again. And Sayaka's sort of reflecting on that, and in my mind she is veering dangerously towards using a wish to heal him in exchange for becoming a magical girl. Of course, by this point she's already been warned pretty thoroughly about doing something like that, and how if she wants to get something out of it, it wouldn't truly be a selfless wish. So, understandably, after the events of yesterday, Madoka's probably not feeling very well about watching her friend die in front of her. Of course, given the, the supernatural elements of everything, she can't exactly tell her family what's going on. She sort of plays it off as, something else, but, I guess it's interesting that it took this long for her to break down. Granted, we didn't see the intervening time between what happened yesterday and the next morning. So, once again, Madoka's teacher sort of goes off in a weird dating rant about how her love life is crappy. I'm really noticing a trend here. So, Madoka brings up an interesting point here about the isolation that she and Sayaka are feeling, in no small part due to the fact that their knowledge is largely secret from the public. So, to compound on that, they sort of have to carry the grief of the death of Mami amongst themselves, and they can't share that burden with anyone else. So interestingly, this little bit of dialogue is framing it as though that Madoka is being selfish for not wanting to be a magical girl. Something she doesn't have to do, mind you. So QB sort of frames this as though, since Mami's gone, the territory is available for another magical girl to hop in and pick up the mantle. He makes it sound like it's, territorial. So interestingly, QB almost lets something slip here about how all magical girls share the same fate. Of course, that is true, but he's not telling the full story here. I guess at this point, Madoka can't help herself, and she heads back to Mami's now abandoned apartment. And I think the sort of the sunset lighting lends it a rather eerie tone, especially because the color of the sunset is very similar to the color of Mami's soul gem. I don't think that's entirely a coincidence. So, the plot thickens here a little bit more when Homura confronts Madoka and sort of, I guess tries to comfort her about everything in a weird, stilted sort of way. So this conversation between Madoka and Homura is, I guess, evolving in that Homura says, "What happened to Mami couldn't have been avoided." We also now learn that Homura's seen so many people die horribly that she's lost counting. So Homura also expands a little bit on the cruel fate Mami has suffered. She doesn't really have any family, and because her body was left in the witch's labyrinth, it'll stay there, meaning she's essentially a missing person forever, and no body will ever be found. I guess it would be a crueler fate if she did leave a family behind, because they would never get the closure. But even so, it's a rather horrible fate to befall a person. So of course, I guess the big difference between Homura and Madoka at this point is that Homura is sort of phlegmatic about everything at this point. Of course, she's probably had any and all feelings beaten out of her. So after a little bit more of a conversation between the two of them, Homura gives another cryptic warning. I'd like to think that because Homura ended up being right last time, that Madoka would take this a bit more seriously. So Sayaka's now managed to catch up with Kyosuke, and she's trying to make conversation, but a lot of it comes off, to me at least, as awkward. So it's like she's trying to make it about herself, and Kyosuke, he doesn't snap at her, but he definitely rebukes her. And he makes it clear to her that her showing up with all this classical music and stuff is tantamount to torture to him, since he can't play it anymore. So Hyosuke has been given confirmation that he will never play the violin again. That is, of course, unless somebody makes a wish about it. And as fate would have it, Kyubey is sort of hanging out around Sayaka as if he knew she would be willing to make a contract. So now the plot thickens once more. Madoka stumbles across her friend Hitomi, but Hitomi appears to have been marked by a witch's kiss, therefore is under the threat of death. She appears to be kind of delirious as well. So unlike the previous witch, this witch has dozens of people under its thrall, and they're all sort of converging on one location. Madoka's sort of caught up in her feeling that she needs to do something to intervene. So all the people here seem to be succumbing to despair. They're all sort of gathering in this factory, and worse than that, they seem to be deliriously mixing chemicals together in such a way that would create poisonous gas. Of course, given that everybody except Madoka is under the witch's thrall, they're all going about the mixing process, and Hitomi's even going as far as to stop Madoka from interfering. It almost kind of reminds me of Heaven's Gate, the cult, the way they're talking about this. As Hitomi's talking about, discarding their bodies and all that, they won't need them anymore. So Madoka has now attracted the ire of the witch's victims by hurling the bucket of hydrochloric acid out the window. Or, maybe I've got my chemistry wrong. Chlorine gas, essentially. So now they're all sort of advancing on her like a horde of zombies. At this point, it seems like she's in a dead end, completely trapped. So here's something very interesting that we haven't seen before. As the witch sort of starts doing its thing, introducing other forms of media, Madoka herself changes in art style. So I guess that's sort of indicative of her being a normal person under the influence of the witch. Stylistically, it's very interesting. Even more interesting, Madoka considers this effectively a punishment for her cowardice. Of course, realistically, she's not a coward. She's normal, but she can't help but feel that she's a coward for not making a contract. So now the cavalry arrives in the form of Sayaka, who has since made a contract. She's able to effectively fight off the witch. So fortunately for Madoka, she was able to show up in time. Although given that brief glimpse of Homer we got, it seems like she would have dropped in at the last minute, too. So the interesting thing here about this dynamic is that Sayaka is very, I guess, casual about being a magical girl now. Interestingly, Homer seems to sort of hold it against her for ultimately making the contract. And just like it was hinted at, Kyosuke can now move his hand again, so Sayaka used her wish to heal his injuries. So the plot begins to thicken once more as another magical girl shows up to claim Mommy's territory, only to find that Sayaka has contracted. So this new girl, Kyoko, seems to be a threat. Alright, that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.